Now let's talk more about this idea of the plants and eating plants that I think we can at least agree that the text seems to indicate there was at least plant death before the fall. The question is were plants alive?
Yeah, that seems to be the main thing. I don't hear any Christians disagreeing that plants died before the fall, and even possibly some lower animals. The question that they seem to emphasize is, were those plants ever alive?
Ken, you have something to add here?
Point of clarification there. It's interesting that even those who would argue there's no death before the fall, they want to qualify what biblical death is.
Right.
And for them, there's no death of plants because plants are not really alive. It seems to me that in light of that, they should at least be open to the other point of view that there is an appropriate qualifying of death as being death of human beings. And so there are many Christians who take many different positions, but they're qualifying the concept of death, not unlike the fact that we're qualifying it in a very different way.
It seems to be a matter of degree. I mean, they're saying, Hugh, you and I have talked about this before, what's the principle of when does death and suffering become a real issue?
Yeah, I mean, the statement Marj read, no disease, which I would interpret would mean no bacteria, which I think leads into some interesting biological consequences even for human beings. But they made the point, no suffering. And I think that's the thing I see emphasized in the writings, is they claim that the era before the fall of Adam in the Garden of Eden, there was no suffering, there was no decay. And as you're pointing out or trying to lead us to is that, well, when a plant dies, it suffers. When a plant dies, it decays. And if you accept that there was plant death before the fall of Adam, then you really do have suffering in God's realm.
The Bible does in fact teach that plants die and do experience death, and it uses the same Hebrew word when it talks about plant death as it talks about animal death and human death.
Yeah, the position that the Bible only gives the qualities of life and death to the higher animals, I would argue, is without scriptural support. There's a lot of scripture backing up the claim that even plants, and certainly the lower animals, are treated as experiencing life and death. And yes, the same word that's used for the death of human beings is used for the death of these plants. So, at least from a scriptural perspective, it's putting the death of plants in the same category as the death of human beings, at least in that limited context.
Can you give us a few specifics there? Some scriptural support?
Probably the easiest place to find a lot of support for this would be the plagues that were put upon Egypt in Exodus. And there you'll see a specific reference to the life and the death of gnats, for example, flies, frogs, and also the plants. This speaks in Exodus 10:17. Entreat the Lord your God that he may take away from me this death of plants by the plague of the locusts. And so there you got a direct reference to the death of these plants.
I kind of just did a real quick search in my Hebrew Bible program on my computer of the word death, where it's used, and I came up with about 10 different places where it uses that Hebrew word death with lower life forms, including fish and plants, and it seems to be a pretty widely used thing in the Hebrew language.
Typically what you hear when these people speak in churches is that, well, the Bible speaks about the plants withering. It never speaks about them dying. Well, that's simply not true. It does speak about them withering, but it also speaks about them dying. It also speaks about them having the property of life.
In fact, in Job 14, verses 8 to 10, it's interesting that there it talks about a tree's death and a human's death in the same context, using the same Hebrew verb for death. And so there's another example.
A tree may die in the ground, yet at the scent of its water it will bud, but man dies and is laid away. Psalm 37:2. Like green plants, they will soon die away. There again, it's making an analogy between plant death and a human death.